Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife discussion video, and it turns out we need to have a serious discussion. All right, I asked some questions through social media on the Sharp Stuff Facebook page, which is the page associated with this channel. I asked it on Canadian Knife and Gear, and I put it out there on Instagram. And by the way, if you're not following me in those places, I would encourage you to do so. I'll put links down in the description box below. But what I asked was this: what are things that knife reviewers complain about or make an issue of that no one else cares about? All right. Now, I knew I'd get some responses, but there were a lot of responses. So you guys watching, we must be driving you just a little bit crazy. And I will say, you know, as someone who used to tease his sister as a little kid, there's some kind of perverse pleasure that I get in making people maybe a little bit crazy. So I'm not going to run out and change every single thing about the way I do knife reviews, but there may be some helpful insights here. And by the way, I would love to hear your comments down below further to the discussion that's already gone on. So I'd love to hear you guys go on with this in the comments, you know, whether you disagree or agree with the points that get raised. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get into this list ranked by order of popularity, beginning with weight. All right, how heavy the knife is something that every knife review I think I've ever watched talks about. It's something that I've actually worked really hard on figuring out from time to time. I've had knives where, you know, I don't have a scale heavy enough, and so I've gone online trying to find someone saying how heavy they are because I really want to share it with you guys, and it turns out you don't even care. All right, so weight was the #1 most mentioned issue, and everyone was like, dude, if it weighs 4.5 or 5 or 6 or 3 ounces, who cares, right? And so I think there's probably a point at which some of you would care. You know, if a knife is 10 or 11 or 15 ounces, a folding knife, imagine that, you know, you're probably gonna care, all right? But I do get the point, all right? And the point is, look, Kevin, as long as it's not a giant brick that's super onerous to carry, just move on with life, all right? One person said something I thought was funny. It said, all of you knife reviewers act like you're about to go on a 100-mile trek and you have to be obsessed about every ounce you're carrying. And I think that's true. And by the way, I think that kind of comes from the influence of Nut and Fancy. If you've been around for a while and you came up and kind of cut your teeth like I did on Nut and Fancy knife reviews, then, you know, you have that 4-ounce number in your head and you're kind of thinking any knife more than 4 ounces is too heavy. When, of course, the reality is, you know, I carry knives that weigh 6 ounces, that weigh 7 ounces. And honestly, I don't even really notice it. So weight was the first thing that a lot of you guys said, why do you guys get so obsessed with weight? No one else cares. All right, number two, and you're going to notice, none of the knives, I actually looked around to see if I could find one. I don't have any deep carry pocket clips right now. None of the knives I have have deep carry clips on them, but I am well aware that lots of reviewers talk about a knife with a deep carry clip as if, you know, it's just the greatest thing ever. But it turns out a number of you have actually said, look, I don't care if it's deep carry or not. I just want the clip to work and for the knife not to fall out of my pocket. Who cares if it's deep carry? And honestly, I'm pretty much totally with you on that. And actually, some of you went so far as to say, you know, a deep carry clip can and often does make the knife harder to get out of the pocket. And I've experienced that myself. So this one, guys, I'm totally with you on this. Does it need a deep carry clip? No, it doesn't. There are some deep carry clips that are really well done that I do like. But generally speaking, if a knife goes in and out of my pocket when I want it to, and it doesn't go out of my pocket when I don't want it to, then the clip is a win. All right, number 3. Now, there were actually a tie for 3rd and 4th place, but I'm going to bring up this one because my good friend Nick Shabazz is going to love number 3, and he has this special phrase that he uses. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to perpetuate the problem, okay? And I am like you. I put this in the same category as cultural appropriation. It is literally not a thing, okay? So as you can see on the back of these knives, there is a flipper tab used to deploy the blade. All right, it is a flipper tab. Could it be too big or could it be too small? Sure. But should we talk about it hitting the other stuff in our pocket? No, we shouldn't. And we certainly shouldn't call it a pocket pecker. That drives me a little bit crazy. And I'm sure Nick probably takes some perverse pleasure in making me, and a number of you, by the way you responded to my question, a little bit crazy. All right, and that's okay. I think Nick has fun with it, and I know I have fun watching his videos, so I'm not complaining about it, but I definitely don't think this is a thing. Of course, for me, I never carry anything else but my knife in my front right pocket, and if you do, you know, I'm a preacher as well. You can come to church here on Sunday and come forward and repent, because you should not be carrying anything else in your knife pocket, okay? Now, let's get back to the list now that we've got the pocket pecker out of the way. And by the way, Nick, we all love you. I'd love to hear your comments on this as well. Come and defend yourself. But pocket pecker is just not a thing. Number 4, lock strength. Okay, so we have the fantastic, super strong, indestructible, better than a fixed blade, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, the Triad Lock. All right, of course, this is the strongest locking mechanism available in a folding knife, and Cold Steel loves to tell us that it's the strongest locking mechanism in a folding knife. Not only that, but lots of guys like to take their knives and whack them on stuff to see if they're gonna fail. They love to take their knives and put negative pressure on them. And of course, I've got the Sebenza here because of that famous video. This is actually, I guess, the Inkosi, to be fair, where it was compared to the Code 4. Listen, guys, the truth is that a reliable lock is helpful, yes. And I don't want a knife with lock slip, and I certainly don't want a knife where I can just put negative pressure on it with my hands and get it to close. But beyond that, you're right, lock strength is really not a huge issue. Now, that's not going to stop me from being a Cold Steel fanboy. I love the fact that I have this really strong lock, and for the kinds of things that I would use this knife for, I appreciate a really strong lock. But even then, I would argue that I'm not going to ever put negative pressure on this blade. If I'm going to put any negative pressure on my knife blade, it's going to be with a fixed blade. That's just the way I'm going to use a folding knife, and the way I would recommend that all of you use folding knives as well, because it still folds and there's always a chance that it could close on you. Okay, so that's what I've got to say about the lock strength stuff. I know a lot of guys love to test their locks. They like to spine whack them, they like to overstrike them and do all this crazy stuff. I don't do that with my knives, because when I'm using my knives, those things are not going to happen. So I'm with you. Lock strength is not a huge deal, although let me say the, kind of geeky part of me that loves knowing that I've got something super strong or super good does appreciate that Triad awesomeness. Okay, moving on. Number 5, bearings versus washers. Bearings versus washers. So I have here the Benchmade Freak, and this knife has fantastic action. As you can see, it's a little harder to do on camera, but this is smooth as silk and it has no bearings. All right, on the other end, by the way, while we're at it, here's another knife with no bearings. And I do like a knife that has no bearings. Here's a knife that has bearings. Guess what? I like all of these knives. I enjoy all of them. They all open when I want them to open. They all close when I want them to close. And basically, that's what I'm looking for. And that's what you guys said as well. Okay? Who cares about a number of things regarding action? Is it drop shut? Right? Does it do that when you shut it? Most of you said, I don't really care. All right, now I know there are some of us who are gonna fondle our knives and kind of play with them and flip them open and closed over and over again. And probably those people are gonna appreciate it a little bit more. Let me say, you can have a great action on a knife with washers. You can have a great action on a knife with bearings. Doesn't really matter. As long as the action is great, that's what I'm gonna appreciate, and what seems like most of you appreciate as well. Okay, number 6. This one is absolutely a pet peeve of mine. Number 6 is out-of-box sharpness. And when it comes to out-of-box sharpness, guys, I have to say, I could care less, and I don't know why you care either, because it doesn't matter how sharp your knife comes out of the box, it's not gonna stay that way. Okay, and I sometimes wonder if this is part of our obsession with steel as well. We think if we got a really good steel, it's going to hold an edge for a really long time. And if I suck at sharpening, maybe I'll never have to learn because I've got M390. But the truth is, you will have to learn, okay? There's no such thing as a knife that never goes dull. And so it doesn't matter how sharp it comes, it's going to get dull and you're going to have to sharpen it. So there are two things you won't see on this channel. Number one is paper cut test. See how well this knife cuts paper. Any knife, if it's properly sharpened, I could go get a 25-year-old butter knife out of the drawer and put a crazy sharp edge on it and it would cut paper. And I could show you guys a video where it cuts paper really well. Now, 30 seconds later, if I tried to cut virtually anything else, it's going to suck. All right. So yeah, I'm not going to cut paper and I'm not going to talk about out-of-box sharpness. And the comment was made, look, some people aren't good at sharpening, so they really need a knife that comes sharp in the box. And I responded to that by saying, the knife is going to get dull anyway. Right? If you are going to carry a knife, you got to learn to sharpen it. It's like putting gas in your car. You can't say, I need a car that has really good gas mileage because I don't want to ever fill it up. That's not a thing, okay? And the same is true of knives. You can't have a knife that has really good edge retention and think you'll never have to sharpen it. It doesn't work. All right, so next point, and this is again one that I'm going to make a change regarding. The next point that was made was about ergonomics. How comfortable is this knife in hand? And I think some people do care about it, but I think the accusation being made here is you guys make too much of a deal out of ergonomics, right? How comfortable is this? Does it have any hot spots? That came up quite a bit. Ergonomics, hot spots, sharp jimping, all that kind of stuff. And essentially you guys said, look, there are a lot of knives that you're never going to use for, cutting down a tree in the forest or skinning out an elk. And for those knives, these are perfect examples. All right. It doesn't really matter. Now, both of these happen to be fairly comfortable. The crux is a little more comfortable. The edges on the keen here are a little more squared off. Not that it's uncomfortable, but you guys do make a good point. The fact is, most of us aren't going to be using our folding knives for anything that requires a whole lot of comfort. And so if there's a little bit of a hot spot, it's no big deal. Now, there are examples such as the Microtech DOC. When it first came out, it was horrible. And you couldn't almost hold the knife. It was that bad. And so there, I think as a reviewer, it makes sense to say something about it. But other than that, sure. All right, we'll back off of the ergonomics discussion, right? I'll just say, yeah, it's pretty comfortable, or no, it's not very comfortable at all if it's a real failure. All right, now let's move on to the next one, and this is one I am going to make some changes around, and that is taking measurements. You guys complained, look, why do you reviewers always measuring everything and getting out calipers and doing all that? It's not fun to watch, and we fast forward through those parts of the video anyway. All right, so I have decided, based on that feedback from a lot of people, it was surprising how many people mentioned taking measurements. Based on that, I'm going to change how I do my videos. What I'm going to do is, you guys know I have that nice steel ruler that I always use. What I'm going to do is when I start a video off, I'm going to put the ruler up here. I'm going to have the knife kind of sitting near the ruler. So if you really, really care, you can pause the video. You can take a look at where, the blade ends and where the handle begins and just sort of get those measurements for yourself. But I'm not going to make a big comment about going through all of the numbers, and of course the other thing is you can find those specs online and they're usually fairly close to accurate, okay, within 1/8 of an inch or something. And honestly, that's close enough that it doesn't really matter. So that was the other thing. Stop taking measurements and going on and on about the measurements. We don't care. All right. I don't know what number we're on. Number 9, branding. Okay, so here is what we're talking about. You can see this knife says mass drop and it's S35VN. Honestly, here's another one. The mass drop is a little smaller on this. Let's see if I can find one that doesn't have much branding. So here we go. Here is a knife that doesn't have any branding. It's got that nice clean blade. Very, very well done. Most reviewers and most people aesthetically, I would say, feel like, okay, it's classier, it's nicer to have this sterile blade than it is to have mass drop printed on here. Okay, and let me say this, it is 100% aesthetics. You're right. Those of you who said it doesn't affect the performance of the knife in any way, you're right, it doesn't. All right, but a knife being attractive or ugly, I mean, that affects the knife. And it certainly affects how many are going to sell, because the fact is these days, most knives are purchased online. That means you're looking at a picture. And if the knife looks pretty in the picture, there's a much greater chance you're going to buy it. By the way, this is a beautiful knife. I don't know. I can go on and on about the Triad Lock, so I won't. But branding was something you guys mentioned. Now, I will say this. Some companies go over the top, okay? Something like anything from SOG that just says SOG, 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 SOG. You know, if they could make a knife out of the SOG letters, I'm sure they would. Okay, and that's a little over the top, but you're right. Branding is not that big of a deal. 3D machine clip. This is something you guys made the accusation that we love. Okay, and I will say, I like this 3D machine clip. It's really, really nice. But does a knife need it? Does it somehow make the knife better? Is this knife superior to this one because it has a spring clip? No, it's not at all. You guys are right, it doesn't need a machine clip. And in fact, you're right that a lot of clips, or a lot of 3D machine clips, don't perform as well as spring clips. So in that way, you know, the exact opposite of what we tend to like is true. And so again, and this is, you know, this has normally been my practice anyway, but yeah, if the clip works, it works. If the knife goes in and out of your pocket when you want it to, then great. All right. Now, here's one that I think is going to be a little more controversial. And I'd love, again, to hear your comments on this. So you guys probably can tell just by the way I'm setting these. Whoops. Wasn't planning to do a domino demonstration here. Sorry, guys, I got some poison ivy on my hand. You'll have to deal with it. Okay, so centering. Is the knife well centered? And a number of you said, who cares? Why do you guys make a deal out of centering? Well, the reason we make a deal out of centering, and on a knife like this, honestly, or a knife like this, who cares? Right? These are purely cutting tools and nothing more. These knives, however, are something a little more than cutting tools. They're a little bit of man jewelry, and I want tight tolerances, and I want manufacturing perfection out of knives like this. And part of manufacturing perfection is, in my opinion, good centering. And so you're right, on a knife like this, let's see, how is the centering on this one? It's okay. On a knife like this, centering doesn't matter, and we probably shouldn't be talking about it. So I totally agree. I'm going to disagree, though, on higher end knives where there is an expectation of very tight tolerances and manufacturing excellence. All right, moving on to the sharpening choil. This was one of the things, I'm trying to think of here what we've got. Now that has a cutout. Let's see, this guy has a sharpening choil. I'm sure it does. Kind of. So there we go. That little cut right there that kind of terminates the blade and separates it from the ricasso, that is a sharpening choil. And a lot of companies mess up how they do a sharpening choil. Some are better than others. And you're right, we probably make too much of an issue out of it. Who really cares? If you can get, you know, let's imagine if they had just continued to grind this to here and it kind of got thick and maybe looked a little bit ugly there. Does it really matter? Does it affect the performance of the knife? No, it doesn't. All it is, like I said, maybe a little bit ugly. Let's see, there's another nicely done choil. Okay, but if this knife didn't have the choil, right? If this just ran right into the ricasso, would we care? I probably wouldn't care. I may make a mention of it, especially if it looks really weird, but it's not a big deal, you're right. And some of us do go overboard making a big issue out of this. Blade length and size. This was something that came up a number of times, and yeah, I'm guilty on this one, okay? My biggest complaint about this knife is it's practically perfect. It really is one of the nicest knives released in recent days, recent years, I guess, but it's too small for me. So I know it's not too small for everyone, and I try to keep that in mind in my videos, but I definitely like the larger blades for sure. Other guys are the opposite of me. You know, they would say this blade is perfect and this one or that one or this one are just way too big, and they're, you know, perfectly within their rights to be wrong about that. The fact is that 8.5 inches is the perfect size for a folding knife, and that is outside of any discussion. So that one is off limits. You cannot talk about it in the no, I'm just kidding. I really don't care what you talk about in the comments. Of course, I like larger blades. I know some of you like smaller blades. But you did make a point that I think is worth bringing up, and that is you talked about guys reviewing and talking about knives that they don't like. Okay, so I would be guilty of this, for example, if I said to you, Here's a knife that I haven't reviewed yet. By the way, I absolutely love it. It is the Master Drop Laconico Keen, but it's definitely sort of on the lighter end of things. I wouldn't want to take this out and start batoning with it. I wouldn't want us to go and skin an animal with it. It's sort of a light-duty EDC knife. And it's true that there are some reviewers out there who don't like light-duty EDC knives. They want something more like this, okay? And so when they review a light-duty EDC knife, they crap all over it because it's not as heavy duty as a Recon 1. On the other hand, there are those who like a knife like this that's sort of lighter duty, that they all they've got to do is, cut up the apple that they brought in their lunch, and they don't need anything more heavy duty. And so they'll do the opposite. They'll review a knife like this and crap all over it. And the fact is, both knives have a purpose and both knives have a place. It depends on what you need your knife for. And this knife, I would say, is kind of in a weird place because it's definitely geared toward a user knife, and it's got washers, and there are a number of things that I would say make this a great EDC knife, but I wouldn't call this heavy use, right? And so, again, some guys are going to be critical of that. Some guys are going to be more critical of this. The point that you guys were making is, look, review the knife for what it's for, okay? Don't review it for what it's not for. That's a dumb way to look at it. And you're right, that is a dumb way to look at it. So point taken, all right? Let's go on. Let's see. My lock stick was one, and primarily I think, when I'm reviewing a knife, I do talk about how easy or hard it is to move the lock bar, whether it be a liner lock or a frame lock or some other kind of lock. I will talk about how difficult or how simple it is to actuate the lock. But you're right, a little bit of lock stick is usually not a big deal and can actually be a good thing if it just means that the lock geometry is so near to perfect that they're just lining right up. Number 15, country of origin. Yeah, okay, well, bad time to say that with all these knives on screen, but yeah, here we go. So let's do the Triad versus the Inkosi. All right, there'd be a lot of people out there who go, yep, this knife is way better because it's made in the USA. I'm not in the USA. I really could care less where a knife is made. I care how well it works. If it works good, if it's comfortable, if it performs, it's going to get a good review from me. And if it doesn't perform well, it's going to get a bad review. That's the end of the story. Something like the Buck Lightweight. I get a lot of flack about the Buck 110 Lightweight. You have no idea how many people just hate that I did not like that knife. It's garbage. Don't bother buying that stupid thing. Anyway, but people would say, it's made in America, you should like it. I'm like, dude, if you make a piece of junk in America, it's still a piece of junk. All right, so moving on with life. I don't care where the thing is made. I care how well it works. Next one quickly is steel, and they'll talk about reviewers making a big issue out of a knife that has decent steel, but they wish it would have been better. And the only time I think you're going to find this is, I guess the Inkosi makes a good example. Some would say, look, this is $425. This needs to be M390. It needs to be something high end. It needs to be something special. Of course, Chris Reeve would say, no, S35VN is a great cutting steel. It's easy to sharpen. It's better than a lot of the higher end steels. All right, that would be his response, and I get it. There are times, I think Spyderco, no, I'm not going to get it right. Anyway, Peter Carey designed Spyderco. It came out recently with S30V and everyone was disappointed. That I totally get because it was very expensive and a very special knife, a production custom knife, and we felt like it should have had better steel. Okay, I won't apologize for that. Backspacer versus standoffs, that's another one. Here's a backspacer. Here's standoffs. Most guys would say the standoff knife, because it's all open, is a little easier to clean out. Of course, the complaint that somebody made, Carrie, was that if you have a knife like this in your pocket, change and paper and other stuff can get in there. And my response is, quit carrying anything else in your knife pocket. That's your knife pocket. Don't put anything else in there. All right. If you really, really have to, a wallet is fine because it's leather and it won't usually bother your knife too much. I really don't care about that. I do like a knife that is, all of these are like this. They have backspacers, but they're mostly open, so they're still easy to get at and clean and lubricate, which is not a big deal. Finally, painted clips. A number of people talked about, I don't like painted clips. I don't like painted blades because they wear too easily. I'd much rather have satin. But a number of you said, hey, I like the way painted stuff looks as it wears. Okay, good for you. I don't, and I suspect, there's a few people out there who would prefer something that's going to wear a little bit better than paint, which is going to chip off and look like, you know, the knife has been drugged down the road within a month of everyday carry. And so that's why we prefer something like this. This is a Parkerized clip. The color is much, much more difficult to get off, and it's going to last much, much longer. And therefore, you know, a lot of guys are going to prefer it. So there you go, guys. Those are the main things that you guys brought up that we make an issue out of as knife reviewers that you guys just don't care about. Sorry for the length of time, but I kind of knew going in this was going to be a longer video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, if you want to be part of the next discussion like this, follow me on Instagram, follow me over on the Sharp Stuff Facebook page, or of course, get involved in the comments right here down below. Thanks for watching. Guys, for those of you who are reviewers out there, don't be too offended. I hope no one is crying. If you want, I can send you a box of Kleenexes in the mail. I'm really not doing that, but thanks for watching. I'd love to hear your comments, especially. We'll talk to you soon.